There is a moment that changes everything, a moment where silence begins to speak louder than words, and distance begins to reveal itself even when standing close. A woman always feels it before it's ever spoken, long before questions are asked, long before explanations are demanded. She knows. Her intuition whispers truths that no denial can silence. She senses the subtle fading of presence, the quiet withdrawal of energy, the slow unraveling of interest that once felt unshakable. It doesn't take grand gestures for her to recognize it. It's not about whether the messages stop completely or the calls grow shorter. It's not about whether time together becomes less frequent. It's about the shift. The way enthusiasm turns into obligation, the way excitement turns into routine, the way passion begins to dry into indifference. She can feel when your heart is no longer reaching for hers, when your attention is elsewhere, when your energy is no longer invested. And in that instant, something profound awakens within her. It is not panic, though she may feel a sting. It is not desperation, though she may reflect on what was lost. Instead, it is awareness, a raw, undeniable awareness that the connection she once leaned on is no longer the same. The realization strikes not as a single thunderclap, but as a series of quiet truths she can no longer ignore. A text that feels mechanical, a gaze that no longer lingers, a tone of voice that lacks warmth. She notices it all because a woman's heart is trained to hear the music behind the words, and when that music stops, she cannot unhear the silence. What happens in that moment is not weakness, but transformation. Many imagine that a woman falls apart when she realizes someone has lost interest, but the truth is the opposite. She awakens, she begins to see herself with new eyes. The energy that once flowed outward in the direction of someone she thought valued it begins to turn inward. The awareness hurts, yes, but it also clarifies. It reveals what is real and what is no longer real. It forces her to confront a truth that frees her even as it wounds her. She doesn't beg for explanations because explanations cannot resurrect sincerity. She doesn't plead for more time because more time cannot revive fading desire. She doesn't chase because chasing only validates what her intuition already knows. That interest cannot be forced and love cannot be dragged from reluctant hands. What she does instead is listen to the silence between your words. She listens to the distance between your actions. She listens to the absence that grows in the space where presence used to live. And in that listening, she grows stronger. The very thing that might have broken her instead begins to build her. Because when a woman realizes you have lost interest, she also realizes something far greater, that her value is never dependent on your attention in the first place. She understands that what fades was never meant to last. She learns that what drifts away was never fully rooted. And she begins to recognize that your lack of interest says more about you than it ever said about her. This awareness does not destroy her, it reshapes her. It redirects her focus, it sharpens her vision. The attention she once gave freely, she now guards carefully. The energy she once poured outward, she now invests inward. The love she once centered around you, she begins to center around herself. This is the quiet revolution of realization, when she no longer mistakes your disinterest for her inadequacy. And the irony is striking. The very moment she realizes you've lost interest is the very moment she begins to rediscover herself. She begins to radiate differently, think differently, move differently. She no longer gives her best to someone giving her less. She no longer sacrifices her energy for someone unwilling to match it. She no longer waits for affection that has clearly run dry. Instead, she reclaims herself in ways she may have forgotten were possible. This is the power of awareness, the power of intuition, the power of knowing when to release what no longer serves. For some, this moment may look like an ending, but for her, it is the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter not defined by the loss of interest she suffered, but by the strength she discovered in its wake. So when a woman realizes you have lost interest, it is not the end of her story. It is the start of her rising awareness. Arrives quietly, almost invisibly at first. It does not roar in, it whispers. It's in the way she notices your eyes drifting when they used to stay locked on hers. It's in the tone of your replies, shorter, colder, stripped of the warmth they once carried. It's in the pauses that stretch too long, in the conversations that now feel more like duties than desires. Every detail, no matter how small, feeds her understanding. She may not confront it immediately, but deep inside she begins to know. This is not ordinary knowing. It is instinct layered with experience, intuition sharpened by feeling. A woman can sense the difference between someone who is distracted by life and someone who has truly lost interest. She doesn't confuse exhaustion with neglect. She doesn't mistake busyness for withdrawal. She knows when energy has shifted. She knows when presence has been replaced by absence. Awareness is the first stage of her transformation. At this point, she is not angry. She is not even fully hurt. She is simply observant. She watches, she listens, she measures the new rhythm of the connection, and she weighs it against the memory of what it used to be. And what she sees cannot be denied. Where there was once eagerness, there is hesitation. Where there was once pursuit, there is complacency. Where there was once passion, there is only habit. She may test it subtly. She may withdraw slightly herself just to see if you notice. She may allow space, just to measure whether you move toward her or away from her. And each time you fail to step forward, each time you fail to bridge the distance, the truth becomes clearer in her mind. You are no longer where you used to be. And here lies the turning point. Awareness is not passive. Once she realizes that interest has faded, she cannot unsee it. She cannot convince herself that things are the same. She cannot lie to her own spirit just to protect the comfort of the illusion. Awareness forces her to confront the reality she is facing. It strips away the excuses, the hopeful explanations, the self-created justifications. It brings her face to face with what is. This is not weakness, it is strength, because many fear this awareness, many avoid it, preferring denial over truth. But when a woman reaches this point, she refuses to live in pretense. She chooses clarity over confusion, honesty over comfort. The awareness itself becomes her weapon, because in knowing the truth, she is no longer bound by the falsehood of what once was. She doesn't scream it. She doesn't announce it. She holds it quietly like a secret only she can hear. And in that silence, she begins to shift. She begins to think differently about you, about the relationship, about herself. She begins to prepare, sometimes unconsciously, for what comes next. Awareness is the seed of transformation. It doesn't bloom immediately, but it grows steadily. And the more you withdraw, the more it takes root. She may not act on it yet. She may still give chances, still observe, still hope for proof that she was wrong, but the awareness doesn't leave her. Once it awakens, it stays, it shapes her perception, it sharpens her decisions, it strengthens her resolve, and in time it becomes undeniable. Awareness is the first domino. Once it falls, the rest cannot stand for long, and when she realizes with absolute certainty that you are no longer invested, the chain reaction begins, one that no amount of excuses, promises, or half-hearted gestures can stop. Awareness alone is only the beginning. Once the truth has settled in, once the signs can no longer be ignored, something deeper begins to stir within her. This is the emotional shift, the silent storm that changes the direction of her heart. At first, it is natural for her to feel confusion. She replays moments in her mind, wondering where things began to change. She questions whether she could have done something differently, whether she missed signals long before this point, whether she held on to something that was slipping away from the very start. These questions echo inside her, and for a time they may sting. She may even place the blame on herself. That is the initial wound. The tendency to wonder if your disinterest is proof of her inadequacy, but this phase does not last forever. A woman does not stay in self-blame for long, because deep down she knows her worth. And the longer she reflects, the clearer it becomes. Your fading interest says more about you than it ever did about her. Slowly, the emotional tide turns. What once was pain becomes clarity. What once was doubt becomes strength. What once felt like rejection transforms into revelation. This shift is not dramatic. It is not loud or explosive. It is quiet, steady, unshakable. Each day she gives a little less energy to wondering what went wrong and a little more energy to remembering who she is without your attention. The questions that once haunted her, why isn't he trying? Why doesn't he see me? Why doesn't he care the way he used to? Begin to lose their weight. They no longer hold her hostage because she begins to understand chasing answers from someone who is already withdrawn is an endless game, and she refuses to play it. And so the emotional shift takes place. Where there was longing, there is now distance. Where there was vulnerability, there is now resolve. Where there was attachment, there is now release. It does not mean she stops caring overnight, but it does mean she begins to protect her heart. She stops pouring herself into a connection that no longer feeds her. She stops waiting for reciprocity that isn't coming. She stops sacrificing her peace for someone who is already mentally checked out. This shift is powerful because it marks the turning point from reaction to decision. She's no longer reacting to your lack of interest with pain. She is responding to it with clarity, and clarity is stronger than longing. Clarity allows her to see that she deserves presence, not absence, that she deserves energy, not excuses, that she deserves a man who is invested, not one who is drifting. With this emotional shift, she regains control. You may not notice it immediately, but it shows in subtle ways. She stops over-explaining, she stops seeking reassurance, she stops trying to prove her value. Instead, she reclaims the value she always had, and she places it back where it belongs, within herself. And here lies the paradox. The more her emotions shift away from you, the less power you hold. The absence that once might have broken her now builds her. The distance that once made her ache now makes her breathe easier. What you believed would weaken her, in fact, strengthens her. Because when a woman begins to detach emotionally, she is no longer bound by what you give or withhold. She begins to operate from a place of freedom, not dependency. This is the quiet liberation. This is the inner turning point. And once the emotional shift takes root, nothing is ever the same again. The version of her that once clung to your presence no longer exists. What stands in her place is a woman who has tasted the strength of letting go, and once she has felt that, she cannot return to who she was before. There comes a moment when reflection turns into resolve, when the confusion that once clouded her clears, and in its place rises something far stronger, her inner power. This is the stage where she stops looking outward for answers and begins turning inward for strength. It is the rebirth of her self-worth, the return of her authority over her own heart. At first, she may not even realize it's happening. She simply wakes up one day and feels different. The weight that once pulled her down no longer presses with the same force. The tears that once came so easily no longer fall. The questions that once consumed her no longer matter. Instead, a new thought begins to grow. Why am I giving so much to someone who has already stepped back? That thought alone is power. It is the spark of a fire that will not be extinguished. The beauty of this stage is that she no longer seeks to fight for attention. She no longer battles for validation. She no longer bargains with her dignity. Instead, she begins to remember who she was before your interest defined her. She remembers the woman who had dreams, passions, ambitions, and desires that extended far beyond your approval. She remembers the strength she carried, the resilience she possessed, the confidence she once wore effortlessly. And once those memories return, they don't fade again. This inner power reshapes everything. Her energy shifts, her presence changes. She starts setting boundaries, not with anger, but with certainty. She begins to invest more into herself, her growth, her peace, her vision. Where she once gave her time freely, she now chooses carefully. Where she once tolerated inconsistency, she now demands alignment. And this is not out of spite, but out of self-respect. The most powerful transformation of all is in her mindset. She no longer sees your lost interest as her loss. She sees it as her liberation. Because now she is no longer tied to someone unwilling to give her what she deserves. She no longer wastes her light trying to illuminate someone who has chosen to dim theirs. Instead, she directs that light inward and outward to the world that truly values it. Her inner power is not loud. It does not need to be. It speaks through her silence, through her calmness, through her refusal to chase. It shows in the way she carries herself, the way she no longer bends to fit into spaces too small for her spirit. It radiates in the way she smiles again, not because of what someone gives her, but because of what she gives herself. And here lies the lesson many miss. When a woman reclaims her inner power, she becomes untouchable. The games no longer work. The half-efforts no longer move her. The breadcrumbs no longer feed her. She sees them for what they are, and she simply refuses to settle. What once might have drawn her back now repels her, because the woman who has remembered her worth cannot be tricked into forgetting it again. This is the stage where regret often begins to surface, not for her, but for the one who lost her, because the very power that once was poured into building the connection is now turned toward building herself. And what emerges from that shift is a version of her that shines brighter, walks stronger, and lives freer than before. Her inner power is the proof that she was never dependent on your interest to begin with. Your attention may have highlighted her, but it never defined her. And when she finally realizes that truth, Nothing can stop her from rising. There is a stage that carries more weight than anger, more force than confrontation, more power than words. It is indifference. When a woman reaches this point, it means her emotions have completed their journey. She is no longer battling confusion, no longer wrestling with pain, no longer searching for reasons. She has crossed into a place where you no longer hold power over her heart. Indifference is not coldness, it is not cruelty, it is freedom. It is the release of every expectation, every hope, every longing that once tied her to you. It is the quiet declaration that she will not pour her energy into something that has already proven itself empty. And when she arrives here, nothing you say or do can shake her resolve. This shift is subtle but undeniable. Where she once checked her phone for your messages, she no longer notices their absence. Where she once stayed awake, wondering why you've grown distant, she now sleeps peacefully, unbothered by your silence. Where she once made space for you in her plans, she now fills that space with herself, her goals, and her own joy. It is not revenge. It is not punishment. It is simply her decision to reclaim her time and peace. The most striking part of indifference is how it transforms her energy. She no longer reacts to inconsistency. She no longer responds to half efforts. She no longer invests in guessing games. What once would have drawn her into arguments or explanations now earns nothing more than a calm, dismissive silence. She doesn't fight for answers because she already carries the only answer that matters. Your interest has faded and hers has faded with it. This indifference is not weakness, it is the ultimate sign of strength, because anger still means she cares. Sadness still means she feels. Frustration still means she hopes. But indifference, that means she has moved on. That means she has closed the chapter, even if you're still pretending the book is open. It means her heart has stepped away, her spirit has detached, and her life is no longer centered around what you give or withhold. And here lies the paradox. Indifference often arrives at the very moment you expect her to break. You may believe she will fight harder when she realizes you've lost interest. You may think she will cling tighter, plead longer, chase stronger, but instead she grows quieter. Instead she grows calmer. Instead, she begins to shine in ways that prove she no longer needs what you refuse to give. It is in this stage that regret often strikes hardest for the one who lost her. Because indifference cannot be reversed. Once she no longer feels, there is nothing left to rebuild. You cannot argue your way back into a place where her heart has already closed the door. You cannot reignite what her spirit has already extinguished. Her indifference is not an act. It is the natural result of healing. When a woman becomes indifferent, she is untouchable. She does not look back with bitterness. She does not look forward with expectation. She simply moves on. And her silence in this stage is louder than any words she could speak, because silence, when powered by indifference, is final. So understand this, when she no longer cares, she is gone, even if she still stands before you. And once she has reached indifference, the version of her who once needed you no longer exists. Indifference is not the end of her journey, it is the gateway to her transformation. Because once she no longer carries the weight of disappointment, once she no longer ties her worth to your fading interest, she begins to rise in ways that are undeniable. This is the stage where she reclaims not just her heart, but her entire life. The transformation begins quietly. She may not announce it, she may not even fully recognize it at first, but those around her notice. Her energy feels different. Her presence carries a strength that is magnetic. She no longer walks with hesitation, she walks with purpose. She no longer speaks with doubt, she speaks with certainty. And the most powerful change of all is that her joy no longer depends on what anyone else gives her. It flows from within. This transformation is the rebirth of her identity. Where she once defined herself by the relationship, she now defines herself by her own growth. Where she once waited for your attention, she now commands her own. Where she once put you at the center of her world, she now places herself there, and everything else aligns around that choice. She begins to glow differently. It's not the glow of trying to impress, nor the glow of seeking validation. It is the glow of freedom, of a spirit unchained. People notice it in her smile, in her laughter, in the way she carries herself with a new level of confidence. She has let go of what diminished her, and in its place, she has embraced what expands her. Her transformation is not just emotional, it is spiritual, mental, even physical. She begins to invest in herself, to nurture her passions, to chase her ambitions with renewed focus. The energy she once gave away without thought, she now channels into building the life she deserves. And that life becomes richer, fuller, more vibrant than it ever was before. Ironically, this is often the very stage where the one who lost her begins to feel the sting of regret, because the woman who once needed reassurance now radiates assurance. The woman who once tolerated excuses now demands excellence. The woman who once waited patiently for love to return now gives herself the love she was denied. And once she has stepped into this version of herself, she cannot be undone. This transformation is irreversible. It is the evolution of pain into power, of disappointment into determination, of loss into liberation. She no longer looks at you with longing. She looks at herself with pride. She no longer measures her value by who stays or who leaves. She measures it by how deeply she respects herself. And the beauty of this transformation is that it elevates her beyond the very circumstances that once tried to break her. What you see now is not the same woman you once knew. This version of her is stronger, wiser, more radiant. She does not chase, she does not beg, she does not wait. She moves forward, and in doing so, she becomes living proof that losing interest in her was never her downfall. It was her awakening. This is the transformation. This is the moment she realizes that she is not just enough, she is more than enough. And from that point on, she rises into a life that no longer bends for the absence of your interest. When a woman realizes you've lost interest, it is not the end of her. It is the beginning of something far greater. What may look like loss from the outside is actually her liberation. What may feel like rejection in the moment becomes her redirection toward a life where her worth is no longer measured by the attention she receives, but by the strength she carries. This is why her reaction is so powerful, because she does not simply crumble under the weight of indifference. She does not remain trapped in the silence of your withdrawal. She transforms, she reclaims, she rises, and in doing so, she becomes a reminder to every man, every woman, every human being. Never underestimate the strength of someone who finally remembers their value. So here is the call. Value what values you. Respect what respects you. Do not take lightly the energy, the devotion, the love of someone who pours themselves into you, because love is not an entitlement. It is a gift. And when that gift is taken for granted, it will not remain in your hands forever. Understand this truth. Attention can be fleeting, but respect must be constant. Interest may rise and fall, but commitment is a choice. If you choose not to nurture what you have, you will eventually lose it. And when you lose a woman who has risen into her power, you lose more than her presence. You lose the chance to be part of a journey that only grows brighter without you. The lesson here is not just about her reaction. It is about what her reaction teaches. It teaches that no one is irreplaceable, no matter how much was once invested. It teaches that strength is often born in silence, in the quiet moments where she decides not to fight for what no longer fights for her. It teaches that the end of one chapter is not the end of the book, but the beginning of a story written in bold, unshakable ink. This is not only her truth, it can be yours. Because just as she rises when interest fades, so too can anyone rise when faced with neglect, indifference, or rejection. The call to action is simple. Rise. Do not remain where you are unwanted. Do not shrink yourself for someone who cannot see your worth. Do not pour endlessly into a cup that refuses to pour back into you. Choose yourself. Reclaim yourself. And watch how your life transforms when you do. And for those who still hold on to what they have, cherish it. Protect it. Do not wait until interest is gone to realize its value. Do not wait until silence replaces love to understand what you lost. If you are wise, you will nurture what you have before it withers, and you will honor the one who stands beside you before she learns she can walk stronger without you. Because when a woman rises after your interest fades, she does not look back. And when she steps into her new strength, the only thing left behind is the echo of what could have been. So let this be the reminder. Never ignore the power of awareness, the force of indifference, the beauty of transformation.